Welcome back to Campus Pressbox. This is number 32. Tonight, me, Mike Wilson, I am joined by Seth Merenbloom, who is our SEC 411 podcast person and writes about all things SEC and some things that are not SEC. He's kind of all over the map. And then we have Ben Belden, who is Notre Dame writer, and he loves the Pac-12, which is a good thing for me, I guess. But I am joined by these two fine gentlemen tonight. How we doing, guys?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
doing well.
Doing well. Yeah, I think we all are. First of all, AP poll. Do we have any surprises? Do we have any non-surprises, or do we think it's right where it should be? Seth, I'll start with you.
I don't think there are any surprises. That doesn't mean I think it's right where it should be, because so much of the poll, especially with the AP poll, not the college football playoff poll, is influenced heavily by where these teams started out at the beginning of the year.
I'm a little bit surprised that Florida State dropped all the way to 17th. I mean, I realize Georgia Tech isn't very good, but I don't know. When you look at some of the teams like Memphis and a couple 2-loss teams ahead of Florida State, that was a little bit surprising, but I mean, not exactly earth-shattering either.
True. Does Ohio State still need to be number one?
Well, I mean, I think you said the magic word, need. Do they need to be number one? And I think based on public perception of year over year results, they probably need to be number one. And based on where they started in the preseason poll, being number one, then they need to be number one right now. I personally, I don't think they're the best team in the country, but to the voters, they are.
Yeah, I think that probably, in my opinion, we're looking at LSU or Clemson as probably the quote-unquote best team in the country. But, I mean, people talk about Ohio State's schedule. People talk about a lot of people's schedule and how it's weak. Regardless of how weak your schedule is, going 8-0 is not exactly an easy feat. So anytime you're talking about an undefeated team that started the poll at number one, I don't think you can. They've done everything everyone's asked them to. They've won 8 games. So no problem with Ohio State being number one at this point.
So let me ask you this. So they have Baylor number 2. Is Baylor going to stay there?
No. I don't think they should. I mean, I've kind of led the Baylor curmudgeon train for much if not all of the year. I saw them play Kansas for a half, and I don't know, they pounded Kansas. They should have pounded Kansas. Everybody pounds Kansas, but seeing them up close and in person, I was less impressed with them than when I watched them on TV. I mean, I've been of the opinion for quite some time this season that when they run into a team with good safety play, that it's going to derail them a little bit. What I noticed when I watched them play in Lawrence, Kansas a few weeks ago is defensively, I think they have some holes. I don't think they're incredibly strong on the defensive line, because I thought, not necessarily more often than not, but enough of the time to be noticed, that Kansas's offensive line was winning the trenches against Baylor's defensive line. I think they are going to be upended, and possibly sooner rather than later.
Who upends them?
I know they haven't looked very good the past few weeks. It wouldn't surprise me if their game against Kansas State was quite a bit tighter than people are expecting. And, I'm also looking at their game against TCU.
Have they played Oklahoma yet?
No, I don't believe they have.
I don't think they've played Oklahoma State yet either.
Oh, okay. So they got those. So they got some studs left on their schedule to finish the year up then.
Oh,
so
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, with their quarterback out now, yeah, I agree with you, Seth. I don't see them staying there at all, because you throw a freshman in there, and it's, some people will say, well, you can just throw any quarterback in that system and he's going to do well. Well, that may be right against some teams, but when you got Oklahoma and TCU and even Oklahoma State left on the schedule, that's going to create some problems. I mean,
I think Baylor's a little bit different. Jarrett Stidham, in his, albeit limited playing time this year, he's looked pretty good. I mean, he definitely has the statistics that say that he's pretty good. I mean, he could look a whole heck of a lot worse as a true freshman.
True.
I'd also say that my major knock on Baylor's offense is part of what will make his job, even as a true freshman, really seamless and potentially incredibly easy. And I think they run more of a system, quote unquote, than a lot of those stereotypical spread teams do, because you watch Baylor's offense, and that receiver that the play is called for, he's going full bore in his route. The rest of them are quite literally just running in plays. So I think that makes the job of a true freshman quarterback in that system all the more easy. And that's also why I think that they'll face problems when they run into a team with good safety play and who can really zero in on that.
Ben?
Yeah, I try to stay away from Big 12 football, because at this point, at what point are they just going to get rid of the offensive and defensive lines and just play 7-on-7? Danny and I kind of talked about this a little bit the other night when we taped our podcast. Do they even recruit defensive players in the Big 12 these days? It's astonishing how bad and how easy some teams move the ball up and down the field. So to that regard, I think that to a certain extent, yeah, when you plug in that freshman quarterback, he's going to have success. But it just seems like the first person to play defense wins in the Big 12, and I think if someone can put a scheme together for 1 week, I think that Baylor's very fragile, and they could get knocked off against one of those quote unquote defensive powerhouses in Oklahoma or something like that. So I don't think Baylor makes it.
Here's something else that I've noticed about Baylor, at least my opinion has noticed about Baylor. Shock Linwood, I think, is a significantly better running back than anything they've had in Waco for quite some time. And I know they've had some pretty good running backs there who get severely overshadowed by what goes on in the passing game. But I was really impressed with Shock Linwood, seeing him in person, and every time I see him on TV, just very, very impressed. To Ben's point, when they run up against a team with kind of a salty defense, I think Linwood's the type of running back that will give them more of a chance than maybe some other Baylor teams have had. But then on the flip side, I think what will neutralize Linwood is I'm not impressed with Baylor in the short passing game. Against West Virginia a few weekends ago, Coleman. He has all these touchdowns, runs these deep routes incredibly well. Basically a track star playing football.
Pretty much.
He runs those slants and those intermediate routes, and those balls are bouncing off of his shoulder pads. That scares me if I'm Baylor.
Yeah, that would scare me too, because if you're running the slants are the toughest pass to defend, and if you can run those, but you're not. I mean, they're coming off your shoulder pads. You got cornerbacks that just have to sit on they just have to sit on the deep route. That's all they got to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, with that said, who's the best team in the country?
For what I've seen, here and now, not based on what happened 3 weeks ago, not based on what happened last year, I like Alabama. I think they're playing the best football right now of anyone in the country, and I think a very close number 2 would be Clemson.
Yeah, I would agree. That defense for Alabama right now is just, to me, they're just locking down. And Saban has them playing at a very high level. And then what I saw with Clemson last week, holy smokes! Granted it was Miami, and Miami is not the U from the 80s and the 90s or anything closely resembling that, but still to put, I don't know how many points they put on the board, like 56 or 60. It
was 56 or 58.
Yeah,
58. Yeah.
That's still pretty good. I was greatly impressed with Clemson.
Yeah, that Clemson Miami game was like the second most betted on college football game in Vegas, because people expected it to be an actual close game because people were putting money on Miami. So that kind of goes and tells you what some of the opinion was on that Miami was sitting there at 3-3. You assume that a Miami program is mediocre, but might be able to put something together, and Clemson just went out and whacked them, and it was not even close from the first drive on. Like, never in that game did Miami even seem like they had a pulse.
No, they were sleepwalking to me through that game.
Clemson was giving the Miami fans daydreamy flashbacks to what they used to be.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. No, I would agree with that. What about Florida State went from 9 to 17. Did they deserve to go from 9 to 17?
It's tough.
Yeah.
Because does anybody, like I've kind of said here, does anyone really deserve to be, where they are in the poll? I think with Florida State, I think it was a little bit of this mentality of why people had them ranks at the top last year, why so many people have Ohio State ranked at the top this year, even though they keep winning, but it's not always pretty. And that is, well, look at the year-over-year wins that they've ran off. And I think this loss for Florida State, it was an opportunity for the voters to kind of get theirs, so to speak, and to kind of stick it to them a little bit.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a long time coming with Florida State. Like, they were up there because they had to be, because they were undefeated. And then, when Georgia Tech went and knocked them off, it was kind of like Seth said, a relief for the voters to finally be like, finally, we can vote Florida State a little lower, because, they've looked really pedestrian in a lot of their wins. I guess pedestrian is a good word to use. Yeah. Like, even in wins against like Boston College on offense, as Danny and I put it the other night, can't get out of their own way on offense. And Florida State won that game like 10-0 or 14-0 or something. They should have rolled Boston College. And there's just been so many games like that for Florida State that I think, like I say, I think this drop to 17 was kind of a long time coming for some people.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree with everything you guys are saying, because and Seth, that was a great connection there with Ohio State for this year and Florida State from last year, and getting kind of the writers getting theirs, getting over on them a little bit. Now let me ask you this: does Iowa stay undefeated? Do they run the table?
Well, who out of the East Division do they have to play?
Well, that's a good question right there.
Let me pull it up.
Yeah, let me pull it up.
I've got it.
You got it.
They got Maryland this Saturday. They're at Indiana. Then they play Minnesota, then Purdue, then at Nebraska.
Wait, so they don't play Michigan State, or Ohio State?
That's correct.
So absolutely they can run that table.
Yeah.
Why not?
If they run the table, are they into the playoff?
Well, if they beat whoever wins the East, then yeah.
You got to put them in, don't you?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
well,
for sure.
And this is why, to kind of have a peripheral conversation within this one, next to this one. I mean, this is why the Minnesota job, I think, is a more attractive job than the Maryland job as far as head coaches go. Maryland, yeah, they have Under Armour, they have all this money, but you look at Minnesota, they have, their facilities aren't horrible. They have basically a brand new football stadium. They also play in the Big Ten, but unlike Maryland, they play in the basically the SEC North, let's call it. They play in the Big Ten West, where they get another solid coach in there. They will be up and running a lot faster than Maryland. So to swing it back to Iowa, absolutely they can run the table.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ben.
I think there's a good chance. I mean, obviously Iowa can run the table, but I'm still not impressed with Iowa. I mean, to this point, their most impressive win was, I guess Northwestern. They throttled Northwestern, but before that, they really don't have any. I mean, they have Pitt. I don't know. It's hard to say that I'm not high on Iowa, because how are you not high on a team that's ranked 10 and 7-0 and done everything you asked them, like I said? But they just win ugly all the time, and I feel like a team like Indiana that can move the ball pretty consistently, even against a good defense, maybe even a Nebraska team that shows signs of life once in a while. I think that
Nebraska's not beating them.
You don't think so?
No, Nebraska's not beating them.
Well, all right, I'll give you Nebraska, but Indiana, I think that could be a trap one for this Iowa team, because I don't know, man. I'm just not sold, especially having not played a top-notch opponent and beaten them yet. I don't know. It's hard for me.
Yeah, no, I with the schedule that they got going, they can certainly beat everybody on that schedule and get to the championship game against the Michigan State or Ohio State. I don't see Michigan getting to the title game, but one of those two other teams. But I think that's where it may end for Iowa, is in that championship game. Now, if looking at another team that is playing well in Stanford, Seth, what are your thoughts on the Cardinal?
I mean, we talked about this a little bit very early on in the season, within the first week or so, that people were trying to kind of tear them down for losing to Northwestern in that first game of the year. My opinion then was, well, they had the balls to schedule a real opponent, a Power 5 opponent, first game of the year. And not only that, they had the balls to schedule them on the road, a true road game. It wasn't in Jerry World. It wasn't in, wherever it is the Lions play. It was a true, honest to goodness road game. They lost the game. People were trying to hold it against them, but now they seem to really have it rolling, and it's, I think arguably their first real playoff game, their play-in game, is going to be when they play Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly right, Ben.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about Stanford, but to me, it seems like every time Stanford comes to the Midwest, where I am, it seems like they lay an egg in the Midwest. I was at a Notre Dame-Stanford game last year where Kevin Hogan just absolutely played them out of the game, just throwing ducks every which way. And that's kind of what I saw whenever they played Northwestern the first week of the season. So I think if you take the ball, I don't have any confidence in Kevin Hogan if I'm a Stanford fan. If you can keep the ball, the more you keep the ball out of that kid's hands, to be honest with me, if he can hand it off all game long, then yeah, obviously Stanford's going to win. If you're going to force Kevin Hogan, if you can find a way to force Kevin Hogan to make some plays, I think that's when Stanford gets in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, what he can do is just turn around and hand it to Barry Sanders' kid, or he can hand it off to Christian McCaffrey, who has shown that at least he needs, he should be getting a little bit of Heisman talk. He's not going to win the Heisman or anything like that, but maybe, a little bit of shine for him on just what he's done. I mean, the last game, the Well, it wasn't the Washington game, but it was the UCLA game. He had 350 total yards of offense. He had like 200 and I don't know, 60 on the ground or something like that, some new school record. And he's one of those guys that he just gets in behind that big offensive line, and just when you think he should be tackled down for, a minimal gain, he just kind of pops out and makes something big out of something that maybe shouldn't have been so big. But, I got a lot of faith in their coach, and I remember that after that first game, I watched that whole first game, and I'm like, I just kept waiting for Stanford to make a run and do something, start wearing them down, or do something to. And obviously they didn't, but David Shaw has figured something out, and their style for the Pac-12 is so different from everybody else, because everybody else out here is, running around, running the spread and kind of a defense be damned kind of league. So, with Stanford, they play Washington State. They go up to Washington State this weekend. That could be a little tougher than people think. Washington State's playing okay. And then they go to Colorado, then they have Oregon at home, and then they get California at home, and the last three games are all at home: Oregon, California, Notre Dame. So if they can somehow maneuver that, they can be right in. I mean, to me, they can be right in the talk for the playoff, and should be right in the middle for the talk for the playoff. Thoughts on that?
No, I agree with you, Mike. Beginning of the year, I thought the Pac-12 would be the best conference in college football, and I still give them, as a conference, the edge over the SEC this year. So if they can win out, which also means having to beat Notre Dame, I don't know how their resume doesn't stack up to everybody else's, and that also means that Notre Dame, they would single-handedly eliminate Notre Dame from the playoff discussion, and there's still some other big games left to be played where people can kind of do their dirty work for them a little bit and help them out along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, I think if Stanford wins out, they're definitely as close to a lock as you can be for that fourth spot. Especially being from a Power 5 conference, you can definitely make the argument. Someone from another conference is going to have one loss, and I don't think whoever that is that has one loss is going to be better than Stanford. So I think if they win out, they're definitely in.
Well, let me ask you two fine gentlemen this question then. Is there a conference, one of the Power 5 conferences, which Power 5 conference is going to be left out? Is there going to be a conference that's going to get two teams in?
I don't think there's a conference that's going to get two teams in, and I think if there's a conference that risks being left out again this year as they were last year, it would be the Big 12.
Yeah, I tend to agree. If Stanford loses, I don't think the Pac-12 gets anyone in. I think it's Stanford or bust for the Pac-12. If Stanford would lose to Notre Dame, which as a Notre Dame fan I'm kind of hoping for, but that aside, yeah. So if Stanford loses, I don't think Utah gets in. I think their loss to USC pretty well, and the way they lost eliminated them. And outside of that, I think if the Big 12 winner goes 12-0, they're in. If they're not 12-0, I think probably not.
Well, but Ben, do you think an undefeated Big 12 team looks better to the committee than a potential one-loss Notre Dame team?
That's hard. I just don't see a scenario where a team that goes undefeated is left out for a team that isn't undefeated. I just don't think that's something that, no matter what argument you make, I don't think it's an argument that is going to make a whole ton of sense. Well,
and I think that the team that Notre Dame has to be incredibly grateful for this year is Temple. Going into the year, that game against Temple should have been, one of Notre Dame's gimmies. And and who knows, maybe they still go out and just steamroll that team. But up until today, till this point, Temple's ranked, and that only improves and strengthens an already strong strength of schedule for Notre Dame, because they're not playing the Iowa States and the Kansases of the world. And you look at Baylor, I keep singling them out, but you look at Baylor, they played a garbage non-conference schedule, and then they get to play Iowa State and Kansas on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about Notre Dame, Pittsburgh's ranks too. They're 23rd or something, I think.
Yeah.
So Notre Dame has 2 opponents in the 20s, and then they've got Stanford. So if we're talking about a team, so if Notre Dame wins out those 3 games, if we're talking about a team that's in the past, last year, Ohio State ended on a very high note. So if we're going with that same trend, trying to keep a team that's playing their best football right at the end of the year, then maybe Notre Dame sneaks in over even a 12-0 Big 12 winner. I don't get, like I said earlier, the Big 12 just
they're their own worst enemy. They can't get out of their own way.
Exactly.
Well, what do you do with a team like Memphis then? What if they run the table?
If they run the table,
and Seth, I'm just throwing that out there because people ask that. Well, what do you do if it's at Toledo, or what if you do if Memphis
Houston
runs it, Houston or something?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing with Memphis. To me, if they run the table, great, kudos. Fuente has done an impressive job. He beat Ole Miss. A Memphis team beat Ole Miss, and if they run the table, Fuente has also done that with a new defensive coordinator also. So, I mean, it really starts to establish that organizing and leading a program is something he is legitimately really good at. But with that said, I don't think that gets Memphis into the playoff, but I think it absolutely gets Fuente an absolutely incredible new gig for next year.
On the bright side, talking about Memphis and Houston, they play each other. So they're both sitting at 7-0 right now. So one of them will eliminate the other. I think that Memphis has looked like the better team thus far just because they have that win against an SEC opponent. I don't know. I can't see, even if either of those two teams goes 12-0, I really can't see it getting over. There's so many good teams up in the top 10 right now that I don't think a mid-major type school like that gets in.
Well, and here's something else I think that needs to be added to this equation with the potential of Memphis running the table, which would include that win over Ole Miss. I think it gets Fuente a great new gig, like I said, but I think it begins to be the catalyst, this albeit slow catalyst, to expanding the playoff as well. If you have a Memphis go undefeated with a solid resume, and even if it's an example of the Big 12 being left out of it again, I think that begins to create enough friction within the process that it starts to get the conversation going of opening the whole thing up a little bit more.
Yeah, I think 8 teams would be perfect, especially in this day and age where the top tier opponents don't have the same type of, they're not flying as high over kind of the lower opponents as they have in the past.
Yeah, the gap is closed. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, no better example than, the Memphis Ole Miss game, So, going from there, hey, let's talk about the cesspool in Miami. With all that is going on, what needs to be done? Besides having, getting a coach in there, what needs to be done with that program? Seth, we'll start with you.
All right, I'm gonna pimp myself a little bit here. Weeks ago, I wrote a very opinionated article about Miami and the perception of the program historically and what a big part of the problem is. And some of the things I talked about was just recruiting. Yeah, they still get some top tier kids, but they lose out on even more kids, and they're kids like the Perryman kid, who's the wide receiver now. His first name escapes me. I mean, he's somebody whose father played at Miami, and he still wanted no part of going there. So I think first and foremost, they have to fix recruiting, which is going to be difficult because they're already losing kids to Central Florida, who right now isn't what they were a few years ago. They're losing kids to South Florida. Now you have McIlvain, over, coaching the Gators, and yeah, even if he's a one-hit wonder, he's got Florida back up and running at least for a year. So the competition that Miami has in state, and being forced to run at least what appears to be a clean program, is going to make it very difficult, and is going to make recruiting the thing that has to be improved the most. And that's why, with all these names being thrown out there that are high profile and everybody knows who they are, and they're just roll off everybody's tongue as I stumble over those words. I think the guy for that job is Steve Walsh. He's the former Hurricane quarterback. He as a quarterback there, I think his teams went 23-1. He won a national championship. But that Miami pedigree isn't why I think he should be the man for the job. I mean, the reason I think Steve Walsh should be the man for the job is he's currently at IMG Academy. He's not the head coach, but I believe he has some coaching experience. He's the football director. So to me, what that tells me is, as football director, he has experience leading a program, being the CEO, being the organizer, kind of those accolades I was throwing around to Fuente at Memphis. But he would also be coming from a private program, IMG Academy, that they're starting to pump out a lot of major Division I football recruits. And you get him into Miami, maybe he can start pulling a few of those kids that had been looking at the LSUs, and you start to do something. You start to get some traction. And because he's a former player, he may get a little bit more respect from the Luther Campbells of that U community than an outsider may have had right off the bat.
Ben?
I don't even know if I can follow that up. I prepared for this question to be asked, what the heck do you do at the U? And despite the fact that I semi-prepared for it, I don't really even know. I mean, obviously you need a name in there. A big name, and in any sport, I agree with what Seth's saying about how if you bring in a former player, or at least someone that's played, I think that kids that are in a college football program definitely are going to respect someone who was a college football player themselves and knows the ropes, because they automatically is more relatable. Other than that, I kind of echo what Seth said. I don't think I can put it any better than what he did.
Yeah, I mean, right now, that program is just, nothing describes the program more to me than what happened on Saturday with Clemson. And the one play that describes the program to me is the one where I can't remember who ran it, but it was like a screen pass, but the line didn't move at all. And the D line was like, what? It looked like my D line, with my team, like, what's going on? And they throw the pass and the guy goes 60 yards. Just undisciplined. Right there, I was like, they've tuned the coach out, and they need to get someone in there, I think, associated, like you said, Seth, like in Steve Walsh, associated with the program in the past, that maybe would have some cachet to throw around to say, yeah, I played here. I had success here. Come with me. We'll have success together, and rebuild rebuild the U. Because I think, to me a little bit, I like those U teams back in the day. I didn't mind all the trash talking and the fatigues and, all that kind of stuff. It didn't bother me, and there's some teams in college football that when they're good, like it's good for college football. And I think Miami is one of those teams. Like when Miami is good, it's good for all of college football. So that's my 2 cents with them. But I don't have any names that I would say besides, Walsh that I would think would fit there. I think, one of the names I threw out to you guys in a link was Chudzinski, or I don't even know how you say the guy's name, Chudzinski or whatever it is.
Chud,
yeah. I don't know how good of a fit that would be, or do they do what I think USC should do? Just go outside, someone not associated with Pete Carroll, and go that route. I don't know. But
I'll tell you who they shouldn't hire, and that's Lane Kiffin.
Oh, I heard his name thrown around. I'm like, there's no way. Like, you don't do that. No. Yeah.
I mean, if he's going to be a head coach somewhere, I think a team like Central Florida is a good place for him, or maybe he can go figure out how to be a head coach and how to win, and then get one of these top tier jobs.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what do you think? What if in just to change the subject real quick from Miami to Kiffin, what if Minnesota called Kiffin? Would Kiffin pick up?
That would be such an awkward fit.
Yeah.
No, I mean, with Minnesota, I know I threw this name out there when Illinois fired Beckman, but a guy like Willie Fritz, I think he fits even better at Minnesota than he does at Illinois, primarily because I believe that he coached with Jerry Kill at Pittsburgh State, I believe. So I think that's a name that would fit very well for the Gophers.
What do you think, Ben?
About Minnesota?
Yeah. What do you think? Or what should Kiffin do? Let me put it that way.
Oh, I totally agree that he's demonstrated he's not ready for a, I guess Power 5. Well, I mean, Minnesota's Power 5, but a top tier contending high pressure type of job. I think he needs to go somewhere like a Central Florida or something like that to figure out how to be a head coach before he thinks about taking something like the U.
Or, go to Houston once Herman leaves.
Yeah, I would like that a lot, actually.
See, I could see him going to Houston. It's still in the West. He's a West Coast kind of guy. And Herman's gonna end up somewhere big here in the next year or two. I don't know where, but I just, what he's doing down at Houston is pretty impressive. And I think some ADs are taking notice.
Yeah. Danny Cunningham, who I did my podcast with him on Monday, had an interesting, prediction about Tom Herman. And he said, when Charlie Strong's still struggling in about another year or so, if Herman stays more than 1 year at Houston, then maybe that one might be a nice little move over to Texas for Herman. That offense that he runs would fit in with that 7-on-7 concept in the Big 12 pretty well.
Hey, here's one for you. If we're gonna play, where's Tom Herman gonna be in 2 years? I don't know if I said this to you, Mike, or if I said it in the public Slack conversation. Missouri. The reason I say that is Mack Rhodes, who's the AD at Missouri now, was the AD at Houston who hired Tom Herman. Rhodes moved on to Missouri. I think if Gary Pinkel has another year like this, because Pinkel's only on contract until 2020, which, it sounds like it's, way off in the future, but it's really not.
It's not. Yeah.
Right. And Rhodes came in with the reputation as being, pretty firm in what he expects from his teams, from the program. And fundraising is a huge deal to him. And the biggest thing that gets in the way of fundraising is losing and not having butts in the seats. So I think Herman is a name that is probably on Missouri's radar right now as well.
Does Pinkel survive the year?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It's an incredibly rough year offensively, but I saw some chatter about this earlier today. People kind of want his head. I don't always like his attitude and his demeanor with the media and with the fans, but the truth of the matter is he's won more games at the University of Missouri than any other coach in the history of the program. He's also won 2 SEC East titles, which is, I believe, is just as many as Mark Richt has won at Georgia. And if you're just going to throw all of that away without having who you consider to be a home run hire lined up, you're setting the program back.
Ben, let me ask you this, since you are the Notre Dame fan here, how long does Brian Kelly stay?
I think he's around for, to put a number on it, 2-3 more years. Danny and I talked about this a little bit, but it seems like Brian Kelly's in, I think his 5th, maybe 6th year at Notre Dame. And at this point, everyone that's in that locker room is his guy. He handpicked this team, and they're so close to being, they messed around at 8-5 for a couple years after their title run, but their title attempt, I guess I'll rephrase. But I think that there's not really I definitely see Brian Kelly moving to the NFL at some point, but I think he's going to give it the old college try with these guys that he has in this locker room for another year or two. Especially, I mean, there's a lot of good problems to have at Notre Dame right now, and that's that Malik Zaire is going to be healthy again next year, and Deshaun Kaiser hasn't exactly disappointed, and you're going to hopefully get guys like Will Fuller back and CJ Prosise. So there's a lot of good things at Notre Dame right now that I don't think Brian Kelly's likely to walk away from just yet, but I definitely think that sometime in the semi-near future, next couple of seasons, he's going to make that jump.
What if the Trojans called Kelly?
A lateral move?
It would be a lot. That's what I think too, and I've heard a lot of people talk about that just out here in the West, and I'm like, that's going Microsoft to Apple kind of deal for me.
Yeah,
that's a lateral move.
I mean, I can see it. He wouldn't be crazy to do that. I mean, it's.
No, he wouldn't be crazy, but if you want to step your game up, like you said, I mean, take like LeBron says, take your talent somewhere else, and it would be to the NFL for Kelly. But if the Trojans call? I mean, does he at least listen?
I mean, I think if you move to USC from Notre Dame, you're talking about two teams that are very similar in I don't know, the type of athletes that they have at this point. Brian Kelly has done a great job of bringing those type of athletes, like, I don't know. Notre Dame used to have people like Brady Quinn and Jeff Samardzija who were, great football players, but they weren't the type of athletes that, say, like Reggie Bush was. Now, athletic-wise, I think Notre Dame's playing on the same field as teams like USC, who they're so fun to watch for me because they're just so fast. It's a shame that what happened to Sark and that he couldn't get that organized a little better, because I actually think USC is really good. But I don't think that you make a move to essentially coach the same type of kids. I can't see him making a lateral move at this point after all he's invested at Notre Dame and how close he is.
What do you think, Seth?
No, I don't think it's a cultural fit more than anything, and I agree that it would also be a lateral move in terms of just outright football. I'll be a little surprised if Hayden doesn't finally use this as his opportunity to get Jack Del Rio.
Oh, yeah. I can see that. At least making the call, and kind of backing the money truck up a little bit, see if you can entice them. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think that coach with the NFL pedigree, who's on an NFL staff now, I think a USC is a far more enticing landing spot for that type of coach, as opposed to talking about someone going from the NFL to Miami right now.
Okay. All right. The one name that I think of, Seth, when I think of maybe going to USC is Sumlin. Do you see that as a fit?
Well, the shine's kind of off of him a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
It seems like his MO with Texas A&M is you get out of the gate really strong, you get your butt kicked around the middle of the season, and then the wheels start to fall off. That seems like that's been the case the past two or three seasons. This year, it was with Ole Miss. Last year, Missouri goes in there. They're kind of shaky on offense. Their offensive line and their running game hasn't entirely gelled. Where have we heard this before with Missouri? But they go in there. They go to College Station, and they just proceed to have a field day on the ground against them. So I think Sumlin, the shine is off of him a little bit right now.
Okay, Ben, what do you think?
I think it's more likely that someone goes to the NFL and coaches like the Dolphins or the Browns or something before they would go to USC at this point.
Okay. All right, guys, you got anything else you want to talk about?
That sounds good to me. I think we covered quite a bit.
Okay, one more question. Seth, since you are the SEC guru, you and Bird, take Auburn out of the equation. I mean, to me, but who would be the biggest disappointment?
I would take Missouri as the biggest disappointment. I think for a lot of SEC old school guys, they still really aren't SEC. But They've won the SEC East the last 2 years, so that has to count for something. And going into this year, probably nobody really picked them to win the SEC East, but they certainly had them finishing in the top 2 or 3. I think you'd have to really search high and low to find someone who predicted them to basically finish in the basement. And that offense right now it just looks like Pee-wee football trying to play against the big boys, and just the level of incompetence on the offensive side of the football, I think makes Missouri the biggest disappointment in the SEC East, even if we were including Auburn in this discussion.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you certainly sound like a frustrated tiger. I'm telling you that right now.
Yeah.
Ben, okay, since you make no bones about it that Notre Dame are your guys, we'll take Notre Dame out of the equation.
Okay.
But, not that they're a disappointment or anything, but who would be the team that you thought would be something and they're not?
Oh, that's a difficult one. While we were talking about the SEC, I'm sitting in the back of my mind thinking of just about Arkansas. I think that the all-time low for an SEC football team is losing to a MAC school. So while he was talking about that, I was thinking Arkansas. I can't really think of anyone other than a couple like Auburn, Arkansas, Missouri that really has overly disappointed. Now that I think about it, Georgia Tech was supposedly supposed to be really good, and
yeah, I had them possibly making the playoff or winning the ACC. Whew. Yeah, that was a good pick, Wilson. Nice job.
Yeah, a lot of experts had Georgia Tech or Virginia Tech winning the ACC, and yeah, that hasn't happened.
Yeah. I mean, I was even on Auburn's bandwagon for a little bit, because I looked at them and they had talent. And they had supposedly this, messiah quarterback, and it turns out he can't throw a pass. So, I mean, Auburn to me would be a big disappointment. Even and just out west here, obviously Oregon. Would be a disappointment a little bit, but not. I wouldn't put their disappointing season on the same level like as maybe a Missouri or a Auburn to me. But certainly, Duck fans out here. I mean, the Duck fans are down here in the Valley of the Sun for the game tomorrow night, and it'll be interesting to see how many fans make the trip because they do. I mean, there's plenty of them that live here, and there's plenty of them that make the trip. But they're certainly not. They're ruffling feathers up there in the Northwest, so to speak. So, but Seth, tell everybody where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is at @SMerenbloom. That's SMERENBLOOM, and you can also find all of my writing on campuspressbox.com.
Ben, how about you?
Once again, you can find my writing on campuspressbox.com. No change there. And on Twitter, I am at BBelden CLE. That's BBELDEN. CLE.
All right. Okay, nice. You can find me, Mike Wilson, at campuspressbox.com, writing about Pac-12 and doing the Campus Pressbox podcast. You can also find me on Twitter at Pigskin Opinion. I don't know if I even want to try and spell that. But you can even email me at mike.wilson@campuspressbox.com. So for Seth and Ben, this is Mike Wilson. We will see you guys next week.